The scent of rain-soaked earth and cold stone did little to mask the underlying stench of despair that clung to the great hall of the Silvermane Keep. Phina stood before the massive hearth, its fire doing nothing to warm the ice that had taken root in her veins. She was a statue of resentment, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at her sides, the fine blue wool of her dress feeling like a shroud. "You cannot be serious." The words left her lips, flat and final, aimed at the broad, weary back of her brother, Zane, the alpha of the Silvermane pack. He turned, and the sight of his face, usually so fierce and commanding, struck her like a physical blow. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, were shadowed with a grief so profound it seemed to have carved new lines into his features. This was not the face of a victorious leader, but of a man broken by the very war he had started. "I have never been more serious, Phina." His voice was gravel, worn down by sleepless nights and the cries of the dying. "Our forces are shattered. Our borders have been pushed back to the Silver River. We have lost the fertile valleys, the hunting grounds. We are starving. If I do not accept this treaty, there will be no pack left to lead by the next moon. And the price for this surrender is me?" She spat the question, her body trembling with a fury that threatened to shatter her controlled exterior. "You would trade your own sister to that monster like a piece of livestock?" A flash of the old Zane surfaced, a growl rumbling in his chest. "Jax is many things, but he has offered terms. The only terms that will see our people live. The war ends with a union. Your union. You will become Luna of the Blood Moon Pack, and in return they return our lands and grant us a lasting peace." Luna. A bitter, broken laugh escaped her. "I am to be a hostage, a trophy. A permanent leash around your neck to ensure our good behavior." She stepped closer, her gaze pleading now, the sister overriding the beta. "Zane, please. There must be another way. Let me lead the remaining warriors. We can." "No." The word echoed through the hall, sharp and final. He closed the distance between them, his hands gripping her shoulders, not with anger but with a desperate, heartbreaking intensity. "Do you think I would choose this if there was any other path? I led us into this war with rage in my heart, and I have drowned our lands in blood for it. This is my penance. But it is your burden to bear. For our people, Phina. For the children who will not have to watch their fathers die on a battlefield. You must do this." The fight drained from her then, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. She looked into her brother's tormented eyes and saw the truth. He was begging her not as his alpha, but as the brother who had taught her to track deer in the deep woods, who had sworn to protect her. He had failed, and this was the only protection he could now offer. She pulled away from his grasp, her spine straightening, her chin lifting. The fire in her eyes did not die, but it banked, turning from a wildfire of outrage to the cold, steady flame of a forge. "Very well," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "I will go to the Blood Moon Pack. I will speak the vows to their alpha." A flicker of relief mixed with shame crossed Zane's face. "Phina." She cut him off with a look that could freeze hell. "But understand this, brother. You are sending a wolf in sheep's clothing to their door. You may have signed this treaty for peace, but I am not bound by its spirit." She let the silence hang between them, heavy and ominous, before she delivered the final, quiet blow. "Let the monster take his bride. But on our wedding night, when he thinks he has claimed his prize, I will plunge my dagger into his heart and end this war for good." Turning on her heel, the skirts of her dress swirling around her like a storm cloud, she left the hall. She did not look back at the broken alpha she left behind. There was no room for second thoughts, for grief, for sisterly love. There was only the cold, sharp purpose of a weapon being honed for a single deadly strike. The war was not over. It had simply moved to a new battlefield, the marital bed of the enemy alpha. The journey to the Blood Moon territory was a silent, grim procession. Phina rode in a closed carriage, the curtains drawn against the accusing eyes of her own people and the triumphant stares of the Blood Moon escort. Each turn of the wheel was a step closer to her fate, a rhythm that beat like a war drum in her soul. She practiced the motion in her mind over and over, the hidden dagger strapped to her thigh beneath the heavy crimson wedding gown, the pull, the lunge, the feel of it sinking into Jax's heart. When they arrived, the Blood Moon fortress was a stark contrast to the elegant, silver-veined stone of her home. It was hewn from dark volcanic rock, its towers like claws scraping at a leaden sky. The air here was different, thicker, warmer, carrying the scent of iron, smoke, and a raw, wild power that made the hair on her arms stand on end. The wedding ceremony was a blur of foreign chants and harsh, unfamiliar faces. She stood beside Jax, a mountain of a man clad in black leather and furs. She refused to look at him, keeping her gaze fixed on the blood moon priest, but she was acutely aware of his presence. The heat that radiated from his body, the sheer size of him that seemed to block out the world, the low timbre of his voice as he spoke his vows, it was all an assault on her senses. He made no attempt to touch her beyond what was ritually required. When his large, calloused hand closed around her smaller one to bind their wrists with a strip of wolfskin, his grip was firm, impersonal. It was the grip of a man sealing a business transaction, not a marriage. Good, she thought. It will make what comes next easier. The feast that followed was a raucous, roaring affair. Phina sat beside him on a raised dais, picking at the rich, spiced meat and heavy bread. She drank only water, her mind needing to remain a sharp, honed edge. Jax, however, drank deeply from his horn of mead, his laughter a low, rolling thunder that seemed to command the very air in the hall. He spoke to his warriors, his advisors, but never to her. She was a ghost at his table, a beautiful, silent ornament. Finally, as the torches burned low and the revelry began to wane, he rose. The hall fell silent. He turned to her, his gaze landing on her for the first time with true, focused intensity. His eyes were the color of dark amber, and in the flickering firelight, they seemed to see straight through the gown, through her flesh, and into the cold, murderous intent nestled in her heart. "It is time, wife," he said, his voice quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the silent hall. Without another word he offered his arm. The gesture was deceptively formal, courtly even. Phina placed her fingers lightly on his forearm, feeling the hard, corded muscle beneath the leather. A predator's muscle. She let him lead her from the hall, up a winding staircase of dark stone, and into the Alpha's chambers. The room was vast, dominated by a massive bed heaped with furs and pelts. A great fireplace crackled on one wall, casting dancing shadows across the stone. The air was warm, thick with the scent of him, pine, leather, and the clean, sharp smell of a winter storm. He released her arm the moment the heavy oak door thudded shut, sealing them in. He walked to the hearth, pouring 2 goblets of dark wine from a decanter. He held one out to her. She shook her head, standing rigidly in the center of the room. No. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He set her goblet down and took a slow drink from his own, his eyes never leaving her. "You do not intend to play the blushing bride, then?" "I intend to fulfill the terms of the treaty," she said, her voice like ice. "Nothing more." He moved then, not with the brute force she had expected, but with a predator's fluid grace. He circled her, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made her skin prickle. "The terms of the treaty require a consummation, Phina. A union of flesh to seal the union of pax." She met his gaze, her own unwavering. "I am aware." He stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the heat of him, could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. "Then let us dispense with the pretense." His hands came up, not to grab her, but to the intricate fastenings at the back of her gown. His fingers were surprisingly deft. She stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat, every instinct screaming to fight, to run. This was the moment. The dagger was a cold comfort against her thigh. She should reach for it now, while his attention was on the laces. But she didn't. A strange, paralyzing tension held her in place. The feel of his knuckles brushing against the bare skin of her back as he worked the laces loose sent a jolt through her system, a traitorous spark that was entirely separate from her will. The heavy crimson gown loosened, then pooled at her feet in a whisper of silk and velvet, leaving her standing in only her thin linen shift. The cool air of the room kissed her skin, but it was nothing compared to the heat of his gaze. It felt like a physical touch, sweeping over the curve of her shoulders, the line of her collarbone, the shape of her legs visible through the fine fabric. He did not tear it from her. Instead, he lifted one hand and slowly, so slowly, traced the line of her jaw with the back of his knuckles. The contact was electric. It was not the touch of a monster. It was the touch of a man, assessing, curious, and devastatingly sure. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This was not part of the plan. This quiet, controlled seduction was far more dangerous than the brutal attack she had prepared for. It was disarming her, weaving a web of sensation around her cold resolve. "You are even more beautiful when you are not plotting my death," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated deep within her. His words shattered the spell. Fear, sharp and acrid, flooded her mouth. He knew. Or he suspected. Before she could react, his head dipped. His lips did not claim hers with violence, but found the frantic pulse at the base of her throat. It was a whisper of a kiss, hot and shockingly intimate against her fluttering skin. A gasp was torn from her, a sound of pure, unadulterated sensation that she did not recognize as her own. Her hands came up not to push him away but to clutch at the hard muscle of his arms, her nails digging into the leather. In that moment, the world narrowed to the feel of his mouth on her skin, the scent of him filling her lungs, the overwhelming, terrifying heat that bloomed in the pit of her stomach. The dagger, her vengeance, her purpose, all of it dissolved into a white-hot static, a terrifying, breathtaking precipice. And she felt herself begin to fall. The world returned in a rush of sensation, each one a betrayal. The heat of Jax's mouth against her throat. The solid, unyielding strength of his arms beneath her clutching fingers. The scent of him, clean linen, male skin, and the faint, wild hint of a winter forest, filling her head, clouding her purpose. For one terrifying, breathless second, Phina had not been an avenger. She had been a woman, her body responding to a touch that was both foreign and devastatingly potent. She wrenched herself away, stumbling back until her shoulders hit the cold stone wall. Her chest heaved as she dragged air into her lungs, her skin burning where his lips had been. She stared at him, her storm-gray eyes wide with a mixture of fury and a shameful, unwelcome thrill. Jax did not pursue her. He simply stood watching her with those impossibly blue eyes. A faint, knowing smile played on his lips, and in the firelight with his tousled blonde hair, he looked more like a mischievous youth than the ruthless warlord who had brought her pack to its knees. The contradiction was maddening. "Did you think it would be so simple?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "To plunge a dagger into a man and feel nothing?" "I feel nothing but hatred for you," she spat, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. Her body was still thrumming with the echo of his touch. "Your body says otherwise, Phina." He took a slow step forward, not with menace but with an infuriating confidence. "Your heart is beating like a trapped bird's. I can smell the adrenaline on you, the fight, and the fear. But it is not the fear of me. It is the fear of what you felt." He was too perceptive. She had prepared for a brute, not a man who could see through her so easily. She needed to regain control to remind herself why she was here. Her hand twitched, the memory of the dagger's hilt against her thigh a cold anchor. "Do not presume to know what I feel," she hissed. "This is a transaction. You have your treaty. You have your bride." She gestured wildly at the room, at the opulent cage he had brought her to. "That is all this is. Is it?" He stopped an arm's length away, his gaze sweeping over her, still clad only in the thin shift. The look was not one of lechery but of pure, unadulterated possession. It was somehow more intimate. "This room, this fortress, this entire pack is now yours to command as Luna. My warriors are your warriors. My people your people. The treaty binds us, yes. But it does not command what happens within these walls. That is for us to decide." He reached out again, but this time his fingers did not touch her skin. They hovered mere inches from her cheek, a phantom caress that was somehow more potent than a real one. A strange, pulling sensation began to bloom deep in her chest, a taut, invisible thread connecting her to him. It was unsettling, a feeling of being irrevocably tethered. "I will not force you, Phina," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The beast you imagine me to be would. But I am not that man. The war is over. Here tonight it is just a man and a woman." With that, he turned and walked away from her towards the large bed. He did not command her to join him. He simply pulled his linen tunic over his head, revealing a torso crisscrossed with the pale silver scars of a lifetime of battle, yet sculpted with the lean, powerful muscle of a born predator. The sight was a stark reminder of his strength, a strength he was now choosing not to use against her. He slid under the furs, turning his back to her, granting her the space of the room. Phina stood frozen, her mind reeling. The dagger felt like a lead weight. The man in the bed was not the monster she had vowed to kill. He was a puzzle. A deadly, handsome, infuriating puzzle who had just offered her a choice she never expected to have. The cold stone of the wall seeped into her back, but the phantom warmth of his touch still burned on her skin, and the strange pulling thread in her chest tightened, whispering of a bond she was not ready to name, and a future she could no longer clearly see. The path of vengeance had suddenly become shrouded in a dangerous, alluring fog. The silence in the chamber was a living thing, thick and heavy with unspoken challenges and the ghost of a touch that still burned on Phina's skin. Jax's even breathing from the bed was a taunt. He slept. Or pretended to. The trust or the sheer arrogance of turning his back on a known enemy sent a fresh wave of fury through her. It made her feel insignificant, his lack of fear a greater insult than any threat. She did not move from the wall for a long time, her mind a battlefield. The plan had been so clear, so pure in its violence. Now it was muddied by his words, by his deceptive youthfulness, by the unsettling thread of connection that pulsed in her chest, a constant low hum of awareness aimed directly at him. Slowly, her muscles protesting their long stillness, she pushed away from the wall. The fire had died to embers, casting the room in a deep, pulsating orange glow. She ignored the massive bed and its occupant, moving instead to the tall, arched window. She pushed the leaded glass open, welcoming the bite of the cold night air on her feverish skin. Below, the dark shapes of the Blood Moon Fortress slept. Her new kingdom. Her new prison. A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun, her heart leaping into her throat. Jax stood mere feet away, having moved with that preternatural silence of his kind. The furs were pooled at his waist, his bare torso a map of shadow and sinew in the dim light. His blonde hair was sleep-tousled, his blue eyes wide awake and intent. "You are still dressed," he observed, his voice rough with sleep. "I am still armed," she countered, her own voice trembling despite her best efforts. A slow, devastating smile spread across his face. "I know." He closed the distance between them, not with a rush, but with a deliberate stalking pace that left her no room to retreat, the stone window ledge cold against her back. The night air swirled around them, carrying his scent to her, and that strange pull in her chest tightened, becoming a physical ache. "The treaty is sealed with parchment and blood, Phina," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "But a pack is bound by something stronger. By flesh. By bloodlines. They need to know their alpha has truly claimed his Luna." His hands came up to frame her face, his touch startlingly gentle. She should have fought. She should have reached for the dagger. But her limbs felt heavy liquid. The cold resolve she had carried like a shield was melting under the heat of his proximity. "This is not for them," he whispered, his lips a breath from hers. "This is for us." And then he kissed her. It was not the brutal, claiming assault she had braced for. It was a question. A slow, searching exploration that began with the soft pressure of his mouth on hers, a tentative touch that sent a shock wave of pure sensation through her entire body. Her hands, trapped between them, flattened against the hard plane of his chest. She could feel the frantic, powerful beat of his heart, a rhythm that echoed the wild thrumming in her own veins. A small, broken sound escaped her, a whimper of surrender she hadn't known she was capable of making. It was all the invitation he needed. The kiss deepened, turning from a question to a demand. His tongue swept into her mouth, tasting of dark wine and a uniquely male flavor that was entirely Jack's. It was an invasion, and yet, it felt like a homecoming to a place she had never known. One of his hands slid from her face, tangling in the hair at the nape of her neck, tilting her head to better plunder her mouth. The other splayed against the small of her back, pressing her flush against him. The thin linen of her shift was a pathetic barrier. She could feel every hard contour of his body, the heat of him searing her through the fabric. The evidence of his desire, hard and insistent against her stomach, should have terrified her. Instead, it ignited a matching, answering heat low in her own belly, a pooling warmth that spread through her limbs, turning them weak. Her mind screamed in protest, a distant, fading alarm. This was the enemy. This was the man she was sworn to kill. But her body, traitorous and alive, sang a different song. Her arms slid up, her fingers threading into the soft, thick hair at the base of his skull. She kissed him back, her own tongue meeting his in a sudden, desperate clash. He groaned, the sound vibrating through his chest and into hers. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated male triumph, and it should have shamed her. Instead it fueled her. In one fluid motion, his hands found the hem of her shift. He broke the kiss, his breath coming in ragged pants as he looked into her eyes, a silent question burning in the blue depths. She could have said no. She could have pushed him away. She gave a single sharp, nearly imperceptible nod. He pulled the shift up and over her head, letting it fall forgotten to the floor. The cold night air hit her bare skin, raising goosebumps, but it was nothing compared to the heat of his gaze as it swept over her. There was no boyish mischief in his eyes now, only a raw, primal hunger that stole the air from her lungs. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her the few steps to the bed and laying her down amongst the furs. He followed her down, his weight a welcome anchor. His mouth found hers again, then trailed a path of fire down her throat, to the sensitive curve of her breast. When his lips closed over one taut peak, she cried out, her back arching off the bed, her fingers clutching at his shoulders. This was no longer a political union. This was a conquest of a different kind, a surrender she had never anticipated. As his hands and mouth charted the territory of her body, awakening a desperate aching need she never knew she possessed, the last vestiges of her plan, the cold steel of her vengeance, crumbled into dust. The war was over. And in its place, a far more dangerous battle had begun, the battle for her own heart. The first light of dawn pried at Phina's eyelids, a pale, intruding gray. Consciousness returned not as a gentle awakening, but as a cold, drenching wave of reality. The warmth at her back was not furs. It was Jack's. His arm was draped heavily over her waist, his chest pressed against her spine, his slow, even breaths stirring the hair at her nape. She lay perfectly still, the events of the night crashing over her in a torrent of sensory memory. The feel of his hands on her skin. The sound of his groan in her ear. The shocking, shattering pleasure that had unspooled her, leaving her trembling and utterly spent in his arms. A hot flush of shame burned its way from her chest to her cheeks. She had not just yielded, she had participated. She had clung to him, met his passion with her own, and in the blinding culmination she had even whispered his name. The dagger, her cold and faithful companion, was still strapped to her thigh, a ridiculous, forgotten relic. It felt alien now, a piece of another woman's life. A murderer's life. How could she have ever believed it would be so simple? You cannot plunge a blade into a man whose scent is now etched into your very soul, whose touch still tingled on your skin. Carefully, inch by agonizing inch, she tried to extricate herself from his embrace. His arm tightened instantly, a reflexive, possessive pull that drew a soft gasp from her. Leaving so soon, wife? His voice was a sleep-roughened murmur against her shoulder, laced with a dark, satisfied amusement that made her want to strike him. She stiffened, every muscle locking. The sun is up. The treaty is consummated. The word felt foul in her mouth. There is no need to continue this charade. He shifted, turning her onto her back with an effortless strength that reminded her of his true power. He loomed over her, propped on one elbow, his blonde hair falling across his forehead. In the dim morning light, his blue eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He looked at her flushed face, the bite mark he'd left on her collarbone, the war raging in her gray eyes. A charade, he repeated softly, his gaze dropping to her lips. Is that what you call the sounds you made last night? The way you dug your nails into my back? He traced the line of her jaw with a single calloused finger, and despite her fury, a traitorous shiver followed its path. That felt very real to me. She slapped his hand away, sitting up and clutching the furs to her chest like a shield. Do not use that against me. You took advantage. I took nothing that was not offered, he interrupted, his voice losing its amusement, turning flat and hard. You gave me your surrender, Phina. Freely. The words were striking the heart of her shame. She had. In that moment of primal need, she had surrendered everything. She scrambled from the bed, her body aching in unfamiliar places, a constant, humiliating reminder. She snatched her shift from the floor, pulling it on with frantic, jerky movements. I am a prisoner here, she said, her back to him. My body's betrayal does not change that. She heard the rustle of furs as he rose from the bed. She could feel him watching her, his presence filling the room. You're not a prisoner. You are the Luna of the Blood Moon Pack. Your words carry weight. Your actions set an example. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. What example? That the conquered should happily warm the bed of their conqueror. A shadow crossed his face, something that looked almost like frustration. Is that all you see? Conqueror and conquered? I ended a war that your brother's pride would have let burn until both our packs were ash. This union is the foundation of a new peace. Our peace. He took a step toward her, no longer the seducer of the night, but the alpha in the cold light of day. The charade, as you call it, begins now. You will dress. You will join me to break our fast in the great hall. You will sit beside me and you will show my pack, our pack, a united front. You will not glare, you will not sulk. You will be the Luna I know you can be. The command in his voice was absolute. It was no longer a request or a seduction. It was an order. And the most terrifying part was the small, nascent part of her that stirred in response to it, not with resentment but with a flicker of challenge, of purpose. She said nothing, merely lifting her chin in a gesture of defiance she did not fully feel. He gave a curt nod as if her silence was acquiescence and turned to dress. Phina stood rooted to the spot, the silken shift feeling like a cage. The battlefield had shifted once more. Last night the fight had been for her body. This morning it was for her will. And as she watched Jax buckle his sword belt with an easy, practiced motion, she knew with a sinking certainty that this was a fight she was even less prepared for. The dagger was useless here. Her only weapons now were her wits and a heart that had already proven itself to be a traitor. A servant, a young woman with wary eyes and a subservient dip of her head, arrived with a gown. It was not the simple blue wool of Silvermane, nor the crimson wedding shroud. This was a garment of power. Deep charcoal gray, the color of a stormy twilight, it was fashioned from a heavy, soft velvet. Silver threads were embroidered along the cuffs and high neckline in the sinuous, geometric patterns of the blood moon pack. It was beautiful, austere, and a declaration. He was one of them now. Phina allowed the servant to help her into it, the fabric whispering against her skin like a secret. It fit perfectly, hugging her waist and flowing from her hips. She felt herself being armored in the identity of her enemy. As the servant began to braid her dark hair into an intricate style favored by blood moon women, Phina's eyes fell on the discarded wedding gown. The hidden pocket and the dagger within it seemed to mock her from the floor. She left it there. When she emerged from the bedchamber, Jax was waiting in the antechamber. He had dressed in dark trousers and a gray tunic that matched her gown, a subtle, unified front. His gaze swept over her and a flicker of something, approval, possession, lit his blue eyes before it was shuttered away. You look every inch the Luna, he said, his voice neutral. I look like your side piece, she replied, her tone just as flat. A corner of his mouth twitched. By equal. There is a difference. Remember that when we are in the hall. He offered his arm. This time the gesture felt different. It was not a groom leading a bride, but an alpha presenting his partner. After a moment's hesitation, she laid her fingers on his forearm, the contact sending a jolt of awareness up her arm. The strange bond in her chest hummed, a constant low-level thrum that seemed to intensify with his proximity. The great hall was nothing like the silent, grieving space of her home. It was a cacophony of life. The scent of roasting meat, fresh bread, and ale filled the air. Long tables were crowded with warriors, their boisterous laughter and loud conversations echoing off the stone walls. As Jax and Phina descended the stairs and walked the length of the hall towards the high table, the noise did not dim so much as it shifted. The laughter faded, replaced by a low, watchful murmur. Hundreds of eyes turned to them. She felt their gazes like physical touches, curious, hostile, skeptical. She saw hardened warriors with scars mapping their faces, their eyes narrowed as they assessed the Silvermane prize their alpha had won. She saw older women, their expressions unreadable, and younger ones who looked at her with a mixture of envy and pity. Jax's posture was one of utter ease, his grip on her arm firm and grounding. He nodded to a few men as they passed, his expression open and confident. He was showing them a united, strong front, just as he had said. They reached the high table, and he held her chair for her before taking his own at the head. The act was surprisingly gallant, and it drew a few raised eyebrows from his commanders seated nearby. A servant immediately placed a trencher of bread and roasted venison before them, and another filled their goblets with spiced wine. Eat, Jax said quietly for her ears alone. Her stomach was a knot of nerves, but she knew he was right. Appearances were everything. She broke a piece of bread, forcing herself to take a small, deliberate bite. Tasted like ash. A large man with a braided red beard and a missing eye sat to Jax's right. He leaned forward, his single eye fixed on Phina. "So this is the Silvermane she-wolf," he grunted, his voice like grinding stones. "I am Kale, war chief. I lost my eye and my youngest son to your brother's warriors at the Battle of the Black River." The accusation hung in the air between them. Phina felt the weight of the entire hall's attention sharpen. This was the first test. She slowly set her bread down, meeting Kale's gaze without flinching. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice when it came was steady. "Then we both have lost kin to this war chief Kale," she said, the words clear and carrying. "My uncle fell at the same river. I hope that our union will ensure no more fathers lose their sons, and no more sisters lose their uncles on either side of it." A silence fell over the high table. Kale looked momentarily taken aback, his one eye blinking. He had expected a cowed girl or a spitting enemy. He had not received a Luna. Jax, who had been watching the exchange intently, took a slow drink from his goblet. "My Luna speaks wisely, Kale. The river belongs to the past. Our gaze is on the future." His tone brooked no argument. Kale leaned back, a grudging respect replacing some of the hostility in his expression. He gave a curt nod to Phina before turning to his meal. Phina let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She felt Jax's hand cover hers under the table, a brief, solid squeeze of approval. It was gone as quickly as it came, but the warmth of it lingered on her skin. The meal continued. Jax engaged his commanders in talk of patrols, harvests, and rebuilding. He did not exclude her, occasionally turning to her as if seeking her opinion. She said little, but she listened, absorbing the workings of the pack that was now hers. It was a strange, disorienting feeling. She was surrounded by the enemy, yet she was being treated as their leader. The lines of loyalty so clearly drawn just a day ago were now blurred beyond recognition. As a servant cleared their trenchers, Jax stood, raising his goblet. The hall fell silent instantly. "Blood Moon," he called out, his voice ringing with authority. "You see the woman beside me. She is Phina of Silvermane no longer. He is Phina, your Luna. Her strength is our strength. Her loyalty is to this pack as mine is. And any who disrespect her, disrespect me." He turned his piercing blue gaze across the sea of faces, a silent challenge. Then he looked down at her, and for a fleeting moment the Alpha's mask slipped, and she saw something else entirely. A fierce, protective pride that stole the air from her lungs. "To Luna Phina," he roared. A beat of hesitation, then a wave of sound crashed back. "To Luna Phina." The shout was not unanimous, but it was loud enough to shake the rafters. As Phina sat there, the sound of her new name echoing in a hall that was once the heart of her enemy's power, she felt the last vestiges of her old life fall away. She was no longer a prisoner, nor an assassin in waiting. She was Luna of the Blood Moon. And the terrifying, exhilarating truth was beginning to dawn on her. She had no idea who that woman was supposed to be. The days settled into a strange, new rhythm. Phina moved through the Blood Moon fortress like a ghost learning the layout of its new haunt. Jax was a constant, unsettling presence. He was neither cruel nor overly kind. He was attentive. He ensured she had everything she needed, included her in discussions about the pack's welfare, and every night he shared her bed. Their couplings were no longer a shocking battle of wills, but had evolved into a different kind of conflict. A silent, intense exchange of heat and skill that left her body sated and her mind in turmoil. The mate bond she refused to name was a live wire between them, humming with every glance, every accidental touch. It was during one such afternoon, as she walked the high battlements overlooking the training yards, that she first met him. "A moment of your time, Luna?" The voice was soft, melodious. She turned to find a man leaning against the stone parapet. He was younger than Kale, perhaps only a few years older than Jax himself. He had kind, moss-green eyes and hair the color of warm sand, his features fine and almost delicate. He was handsome in a way that was entirely different from Jax's rugged, sun-streaked power. "Look safe. I am Elian," he said, offering a bow that was just deep enough to be respectful without being obsequious. "I serve as one of the pack's chief stewards. I handle the granaries and the winter stores. A vital role, Phina replied, her guard instinctively lowering at his open, friendly demeanor. It is less glorious than swinging a sword, but it keeps our people from swinging them out of hunger, he said with a disarming smile. I wish to welcome you properly. It cannot be easy coming to a new pack under such circumstances. His empathy was a balm after the constant, simmering tension of her life with Jax. It has been an adjustment, she admitted, turning to look back over the yard where Jax was currently sparring, shirtless and gleaming with sweat, effortlessly disarming two warriors at once. Our alpha is a force of nature, Elian said, following her gaze. There was no malice in his tone, only a note of wistful admiration. It is easy to feel overshadowed in his presence. I sometimes think he forgets that not all conflicts can be won with sheer strength. The comment resonated with a part of her that still felt like a political pawn. You speak wisely. I merely observe, he said modestly. But if you ever find yourself overwhelmed, or if you simply wish for a friendly conversation that does not revolve around patrol routes and crop yields, my door is always open to you, Luna. He gave another small bow and took his leave, his steps silent and graceful. Phina watched him go, feeling a fraction of the weight on her shoulders lighten. An ally. A friendly face. It was more than she had dared hope for. Over the next few days, Elian seemed to have a knack for appearing when she was most alone or unsettled. He would offer a quiet comment on the tapestry in the hall, share an interesting bit of pack history, or simply ask how she was faring. He was always respectful, his eyes holding nothing but genuine concern. He spoke of Jax with unwavering loyalty, but always with that subtle undercurrent of understanding for how difficult his intensity could be. He is a great alpha, Elian said to her one evening as they stood in the library, the scent of old parchment around them. Jax was across the room, deep in a heated discussion with Kale about reinforcing the western border. But greatness often walks hand in hand with a certain single-mindedness. He sees the larger picture, the war, the peace. He can sometimes miss the smaller struggles right in front of him. Phina's eyes drifted to Jax, to the focused, powerful line of his profile. It was true. Jax saw her as his Luna, his mate, a key piece in his grand design for peace. He did not see the homesick woman, the conflicted soul who felt adrift in a sea of strangers. You understand much, Elian, she said softly. I try to, my lady, he replied, his voice a gentle murmur. It is my duty to serve the pack, and that includes its Luna. Your well-being is paramount to the stability Jax has fought so hard to achieve. His words felt like a validation of her own unspoken feelings. Here was someone who saw her not just as a symbol but as a person. Later that night, as Jax slept deeply beside her, his arm thrown possessively across her waist, Phina stared into the darkness. Her thoughts were a tangled knot. The pull towards Jax was a physical, undeniable force. A compulsion that went beyond the political and into the profoundly primal. Every night in his arms felt like a surrender to a destiny she had never chosen, yet her body craved it with a shocking ferocity. But with Elian she felt a different kind of pull. A pull towards understanding, towards quiet companionship, towards a semblance of the peace her mind so desperately craved. He offered a sanctuary from the storm of Jax's presence. She did not see the way Elian's kind eyes followed her when he thought no one was looking, the way his friendly smile would slowly fade into something far more calculating and hungry once she turned away. She did not sense the ambition that festered beneath his gentle exterior, an ambition that saw the new vulnerable Luna not as a person to be comforted, but as the ultimate key to usurping the powerful alpha he so publicly admired. She felt the tension between two men, but she mistook its nature entirely. One was a fire that threatened to consume her, the other she believed was a safe harbor. She had no way of knowing that the harbor was the most dangerous place of all, hiding jagged rocks beneath its placid, innocent surface. The following morning, a tangible shift occurred in the fortress. Jax was gone before first light, called away to settle a dispute between farmers on the outermost edge of their territory. He had left without a word, the space beside her in the bed cold and empty. The absence should have been a relief. Instead it felt like a void, the mate bond a taut, humming string with nothing to anchor it, leaving her feeling strangely unmoored. It was in this state of unsettled confusion that Elian found her, pacing the length of the sunlit gallery. He pushes everyone away in the end, Elian said softly, his approach as silent as ever. He held 2 steaming mugs of a fragrant herbal tea. It is his way. He bears the weight of the pack alone, believing it is his sole burden to carry. Phina accepted the mug, the warmth seeping into her hands. He did not even say goodbye. He does not say goodbye to anyone, Elian replied, leaning against the stone wall beside her. His expression was one of gentle commiseration. He acts and expects the world to fall in line with his decisions. It is the source of his strength and his greatest flaw. He took a sip of his tea. He does not see the loneliness he leaves in his wake. The word loneliness struck a chord so deep it vibrated in her soul. That was it. That was the hollow, aching feeling in her chest. It wasn't just homesickness. It was the loneliness of being bound to a force of nature, a man who claimed her body and her loyalty but offered no intimacy of the spirit. He sees me as part of his duty, she murmured, more to herself than to Elian. And you are so much more than that, he said, his voice fervent. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her shoulder. The touch was brief, brotherly, yet it carried a charge that Jax's possessive grabs never did. It was a touch that asked for permission. You have a fire in you, Phina. A strength he is too blinded by his own purpose to see. He wants a Luna to stand beside him. He does not see the queen who could rule in her own right. His words were a dangerous, intoxicating poison, each one meticulously crafted to erode her fragile loyalty. He spoke of her strength, her fire, all the things Jax seemed to take for granted. He offered not just understanding but admiration for the very parts of her that felt ignored. You should not speak of your alpha that way, she said, but the protest was weak, her gaze dropping to the steaming liquid in her mug. I speak only the truth, he said, his moss-green eyes wide with sincerity. And my loyalty is to the well-being of this pack. Its heart. And I fear its heart is growing cold in the shadow of a single, unyielding will. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. Come with me today. Let me show you something beyond these walls. Something that belongs to the pack, not just to Jax. The temptation was irresistible. An escape from the gilded cage, even for a few hours. She nodded. He led her not to the training yards or the grim battlements, but to the vast, sun-drenched conservatories nestled against the southern wall of the fortress. It was a world of green and gold, humid and alive. Herbs, vegetables and vibrant, unfamiliar flowers grew in neat rows under panes of glass. This is my true domain, Elian said, a genuine pride in his voice as he showed her the thriving plants. This is what feeds our people through the long winter. This is life, not death. This is nurture, not conquest. He handed her a sprig of lavender, its scent calming and sweet. This is the heart of the pack, Phina. Not the sharpened steel Jax is so fond of. It is fragile. It requires patience, care and a gentle hand. His eyes met hers and the meaning was unmistakable. It is easily crushed by brute force. As they walked between the verdant rows, he spoke of his visions for the pack. Greenhouses to grow medicine, irrigation systems to prevent famine, alliances built on trade, not fear. They were peaceful, intelligent plans that stood in stark contrast to Jax's world of borders and patrols. For the first time since arriving, Phina felt a spark of genuine purpose that was entirely her own. This was something she could build, something she could nurture. With Elian it seemed possible. When they returned to the main keep, the sun was setting, casting long shadows. Jax was back. He stood in the great hall, his boots dusty, his expression grim. His blue eyes found them the moment they entered, narrowing as he took in their proximity, the relaxed set of Phina's shoulders. Luna, he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the hall. You've been occupied. Elian stepped forward, his posture the picture of respectful deference. Alpha. I took the liberty of showing our Luna the conservatories. I believed it important for her to see the source of our pack's sustenance. Jax's gaze flicked to Elian, a cold, assessing look that lasted a second too long. Your dedication is noted, steward. He then turned his full attention back to Phina. I require my Luna's counsel. In private. It was a clear dismissal. Elian bowed and melted away, but not before shooting Phina a look that was both sympathetic and conspiratorial. In their chambers, Jax turned to her. The air crackled with his unspoken tension. You spend a great deal of time with Elian. He is good company, she said, crossing her arms. He's kind. He speaks to me, not at me. He is a steward, Jack said, his tone dismissive. His concerns are grain and mortar. There are more pressing matters for Aluna. Perhaps Aluna should be concerned with what feeds her people, she fired back, the frustration of the day bubbling over. Or do you believe a full belly is less important than a sharpened sword? He moved then, closing the distance between them in 2 swift strides. He didn't touch her, but he loomed, his presence overwhelming. I believe that a sharpened sword is what guarantees they have food to put in their bellies, he growled. Do not be so naive as to think his peaceful gardens could exist without my warriors to protect them. Elian plays at life while others ensure he has the right to do so. His words were logical, but they felt like a rejection of everything that had given her hope that day. He saw her interest as naivete. He saw Elian as insignificant. He saw her not as a partner but as a possession who was straying. The look in his eyes was not one of anger, but of something darker, more primal. A possessiveness that bordered on fury. Jax's dismissal of her day, of Elian, of the fragile hope she had begun to nurture, felt like a door slamming shut. He saw her as a willful child, not a queen. You know nothing of what I think, she seethed, her hands curling into fists at her sides. You see an alliance, a treaty. You do not see a person standing before you. I see you perfectly, Phina, he countered, his voice a low, dangerous thrum. His blue eyes were dark, the pupils dilated. The controlled alpha was gone, replaced by something more raw, more instinctual. I see the fire in your eyes that you try to hide. I feel the war you wage with yourself every time I touch you. He took a final step, eliminating the space between them. The heat from his body was a furnace, and the strange magnetic pull in her chest tightened, becoming a painful, sweet ache. She wanted to push him away. She wanted to claw at him. She wanted to melt into him. You think your steward's gentle words and peaceful gardens can give you what you need? He murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. He can offer you a shadow. I can give you the fire. His hand came up, not to grip her but to cradle the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. It was a claiming, but it was also an invitation. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin behind her ear, and a violent shiver racked her frame. I don't want your fire, she whispered, the lie tasting like ash. Don't you? He didn't kiss her. Instead, he dipped his head, his lips finding the frantic pulse at the base of her throat. It was the same spot he had claimed on their wedding night, and the memory of the pleasure that had followed washed over her, weakening her resolve. A soft, helpless sound escaped her. His other hand slid from her shoulder, down the curve of her spine, over the velvet of her gown, coming to rest on the swell of her hip. His touch was possessive, branding her through the layers of fabric. She was trembling, her breath coming in shallow pants. The conflict within her was a raging storm, resentment and desire warring for control. He pulled her flush against him, and she felt the hard evidence of his desire press against her stomach. It should have frightened her. It should have enraged her. Instead, a corresponding heat pooled low in her own belly, a dull, throbbing ache that demanded satisfaction. Tell me to stop, he challenged, his voice rough against her skin. His lips trailed a path of fire along her collarbone. Tell me you feel nothing and I will release you. She opened her mouth to say the words, to command him to let her go. But no sound came out. Her body, treacherous and alive, arched into his of its own volition, a silent plea. A low growl of triumph rumbled in his chest. In one fluid motion he turned her, pressing her front against the cold stone wall beside the fireplace. The shock of the cold stone against her flushed skin was a stark contrast to the inferno at her back. He held her there with his body, one arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her hips back against his. His free hand gathered the heavy velvet of her gown, pushing it up, up until the cool air touched her bare legs. His palm, rough and warm, slid up the inside of her thigh. She gasped, her head falling back against his shoulder, her eyes squeezing shut. He stilled when his fingers found the damp heat between her thighs. A sharp, startled intake of breath was his only reaction. He had felt it. The undeniable physical proof of her arousal, soaking through the thin linen of her underclothes. The truth, laid bare between them, was more intimate than any act of passion. For a long moment neither of them moved. The only sound was their ragged breathing. The fight drained out of her then, replaced by a wave of crushing vulnerability. He knew. He knew her body betrayed her hatred at every turn. His touch changed. The possessiveness softened into something more deliberate, more devastating. His fingers pressed against the damp fabric, a slow, circular pressure that made her knees buckle. A broken moan was torn from her lips as a jolt of pure, undiluted pleasure shot through her. "This," he whispered, his voice thick with a hunger that mirrored her own, his mouth against her ear. "This is the truth." Not his words. This. He continued the slow, maddening rhythm, his other arm holding her securely against him as her body began to tremble uncontrollably. She was lost in a sea of sensation, the stone wall the only solid thing in a spinning world. The resentment, the political maneuvering, the shadow of alien, it all crumbled to dust under the relentless, expert touch of his fingers. She cried out his name as the pleasure crested, a wave that shattered her completely, leaving her boneless and shaking in his arms. He held her there for a long time, his forehead resting against her back, his own breathing harsh. When he finally moved, it was to turn her around and lift her into his arms, carrying her to their bed. He laid her down amongst the furs, his eyes searching hers in the firelight. There were no words. There was only the humming bond and the devastating knowledge that no matter how she fought him, her body and perhaps something deeper was already his. The fragile truce of the bedroom shattered before dawn. The door to their chamber burst open, slamming against the stone wall. Cale stood silhouetted in the torchlight of the corridor, his face a grim mask, his chest heaving. Jax. Jax was on his feet in an instant, a predator awakened by threat. He stood naked and unarmed between the intruder and Phina, who scrambled to pull the furs around her. The raw intimacy of moments before was violently severed. "Report," Jax commanded, his voice like cracking ice. "It's the Western Ridge. The Silvermane patrols," Cale snarled, his single eye blazing with fury as it flicked to Phina. "They ambushed our hunters at first light. For dead. They took the winter venison stores." The words landed like a physical blow. Phina felt the blood drain from her face. Silvermane. Her pack. Her brother. "Zane would not break the treaty," she said, her voice trembling. "He gave his word." "His word." Cale spat, taking a step into the room. "His word is worth less than the blood he spills. While you lie warm in our Alpha's bed, your brother sends his dogs to slit our throats and steal our food." "Enough, Cale," Jax growled, but the war chief was beyond listening. "Was this your plan all along, Silvermane?" he roared, pointing a thick finger at her. "Distract our Alpha while your kin pick us apart?" Jax moved faster than Phina's eye could follow. He crossed the room and grabbed Cale by the front of his tunic, slamming him back against the doorframe. The stone shuddered. "You will not speak to your Luna that way," he said, his voice lethally quiet. "The next word you direct at her without respect, I will rip your tongue from your head. Do you understand?" Cale's face was mottled with rage, but he gave a sharp, jerky nod. Jax released him with a shove. "Gather my commanders in the war room," Jax ordered, his back to Phina. "And send a rider to the border. I want facts, not fury." Cale shot one last venomous look at Phina before stomping away. The silence he left behind was heavier than the shouting. Jax turned. The man from the night before, the one whose touch had unspooled her, was gone. In his place was the Alpha, his expression carved from granite. He began pulling on his clothes with sharp, efficient movements. "Jax," Phina said, her voice small. "Zane wouldn't." "He did," Jax interrupted, not looking at her as he buckled his sword belt. "Or someone under his command did. The result is the same. 4 of my people are dead. The trust that treaty was built on is broken." He finally met her gaze, and the cold distance in his blue eyes froze the words in her throat. "This is what your steward's peaceful gardens are built upon, Phina. This is the reality. You wanted to be more than a symbol? Now you are. You are the sister of the man who may have just reignited a war." He strode from the room without another word, leaving her alone in the rumpled bed that still smelled of him, of them. The warmth of his body was gone, replaced by a chilling dread. The walls of her gilded cage had just become a prison once more, the hostile eyes of the pack now justified in their suspicion. She dressed mechanically, her mind reeling. Zane. It made no sense. He was broken, remorseful. He had sacrificed her for this peace. To throw it away now was madness. Unless he hadn't. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. What if it wasn't Zane? What if someone else wanted the treaty to fail? She thought of Elian, of his kind eyes and his subtle words, his gentle undermining of Jax's authority. He had access. He knew the patrol routes, the hunting schedules. The thought was a sliver of ice in her heart. Was his kindness merely a mask for a deeper game? Pulling a cloak around her shoulders, she left the chambers. The fortress was a stirred hornet's nest. Warriors sharpened blades, their faces hard. Women gathered children close, their eyes wide with a fear she remembered all too well. And every gaze that fell upon her was no longer merely hostile. It was accusing. She found Elian in the great hall, directing servants with a calm efficiency that contrasted sharply with the panic around him. "Luna," he said, his face a portrait of grave concern. "A dark day. I am so sorry you must bear this burden." "Who would do this, Elian?" she asked, searching his moss-green eyes for any flicker of deceit. "Who benefits from this chaos?" His expression was all innocent confusion. "Why, the Silvermane, of course. They strike a blow, shame us, test our resolve." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Or perhaps those within our own pack who believe Jax was too soft in his terms. There are many, even among his commanders, who wanted total conquest, not peace." The suggestion was deft, turning suspicion back onto Jax's own allies. It was plausible. It was clever. And as Phina looked at his handsome, concerned face, she could no longer tell if he was her only ally or her most dangerous enemy. The trouble had come, and with it, a terrifying realization. She was trapped between two packs trusted by neither, and the only thing more frightening than Jax's rage was the viper's smile in the shadows.